Good afternoon and welcome to Moth News Live. My name is Keith Walsh and we'll be here for about an hour. So sit back, relax. Don't relax too much if you're on a bus and your stop is coming up. Just kind of keep an eye, one eye on us, one eye on the bus stopping at your bus stop because we don't be responsible for people missing their buses on such a lovely day. We're coming to you live from the bunker somewhere underneath the chip shop in the county of Westmeath. Um, so you'll never find us, whoever's trying to shut us down. Nobody's trying to shut us down. It is Friday, it's 3 o'clock, and we have a show packed with some tough truths, some sharp analysis, and we don't have any tolerance for spin around here. Okay? Unless you're spinning records, feck off. Today we're talking about global trade wars, tariffs, that kind of stuff. We're talking about the, uh, you know, Mind Our Women and Children Brigade and how silent they've been this week. I'll tell you more about that in just a little while. And also the shocking treatment of Irish mothers protesting peacefully outside the Dáil. So it's coming up. Also, Philip will have a very special guest to talk about those tariffs, an expert, and I will leave that conversation because tariffs. Philip is the expert, and he'll be talking to a more expert, if you know what I mean. And Al will be joining us at 1:30 as well. So let's get cracking. Right. First up, China versus USA. Tariffs, war goes nuclear. It's not actually going nuclear. It's okay. Relax. We'll be fine. The world's two largest economies are now locked into what looks like a full-scale trade war. China just announced it's slapping a massive 34% tariff on imported American goods. A direct retaliation against the US, which just yesterday or the other day imposed the exact same percentage of tariffs on Chinese products. I mean, I like it. You don't think too much about it. If you're Chinese, go, yeah, we'll put tariffs on you of the exact same amount. If it was me, I'd have said 35%, just to make it look like I've thought about it. But yeah, I'm not sure that Donald Trump has really thought this through, but we will have an expert on just a little while, so I should shut up about that, really. Beijing's Ministry of Commerce called the US move a typical act of unilateral bullying and urged Washington to resolve disputes through fair and equal dialogue. See, a lot of these countries would have, agreements set up, and basically Donald Trump is laughing in the face of these agreements. But dialogue seems a long way off right now. Trump, back in the headlines again, had already hit China with 20% tariff earlier this year. The latest 34% brings the total up to nearly 60%. Doesn't mean nothing to me. Yeah, make no mistake, this isn't like a China versus US issue alone. This will have ripple effects throughout the global economy, especially for a small open country like us in Ireland. We seem safe so far. If supply chains stall or prices spike, we'll all feel it. And yeah, it's always the way. The little guy always gets it. And we're all quite like, well, I suppose we're tall enough, aren't we? Philip O'Connor will be talking to economist Dr. Constantin Gurdgiev about the potential impact of all of this and whether it's posturing or a real threat to economic stability. And I'm sure Philip will correct me on my pronunciation. So we also need to talk about this, moving away from the US and China, coming back home. It's a bit tough, but it needs to be said. So there's been a lot of noise lately about the so-called unvetted migrants and illegal immigrants. There's no such thing as an illegal immigrant, by the way, being an illegal asylum seeker. An asylum seeker is an asylum seeker. They're only illegal if, they've no reason to seek asylum, and usually they'll be sent home. But apparently there's a lot of talk that these are a major threat to Irish women and children. But this week, again, it's Irish men who dominate the court reports for child abuse, for rape, and for domestic murder. So let's just go through a few of the incidents this week. And Kerry Paul Kelly, age 46, was sentenced to 7.5 years for assault on his younger brother. And this assault was repeated over a 4-year period in the 1990s. The abuse started when Kelly was 16 and his brother was just 10. In Meath, two brothers, David and Jonathan Hamilton, were convicted for the rape and sexual abuse of two of their younger cousins. One of the girls was just 7 when it began. The abuse was so normalized within the family that one of the cousins, at one of the incidents between the two of them, told the other to have a go. And the girls have been pretty much ostracized from the family who decided to side with the two men. There was also a 20-year-old Dublin woman who went on trial accused of sexually abusing her younger female cousin when they were both minors, and that case is still unfolding. And I could go on. The point is, abuse, rape, sexual assault, GBH, domestic abuse is illegal, and it should be tackled. And these people should face the penalties and the full rigors of the law. It doesn't matter where they're from. It doesn't matter what their surname is. It doesn't matter what the color of their skin is. And it's surprising, not surprising at all, how little we hear from certain people who talk. If there's an assault on a girl or a man or a young woman or a child in this country, and the person's surname doesn't appear to be Irish, or they have different color skin to us, you will see that story shared everywhere by certain people. It'll be blasted on social media. And I kind of feel like, yeah, rightly so, because it's bad and we should stamp down on this. But these people who are here and are worried about foreigners coming to our country because of the safety of our women and our children go very quiet when it's a man and when it's an Irish man. Very, very quiet. So it would lead one to believe that this is a right-wing agenda, and it's right-wing propaganda trying to make you think, like they used to do in America in the 50s and 40s, that people who have a different color skin, or people who come from a different country, or people who have a different surname, or people who speak a different language are the problem. So this is about, when you see those things posted on social media, those incidents, those court cases, that abuse, it should be blasted out there that a man or a woman has done something terrible. But we should also equally blast the names of Irish men and women who do these things, because it's a crime and it's terrible and it should be stamped out. But focusing on this idea that it's foreigners who have just recently moved to this country takes away from the real problem, and it doesn't allow us to focus on fixing the problem. The amount of abuse of women and young women, children in this country is off the charts, and our attitude towards it sucks, and we need to do better. So you fascists and right-wing people, you're not helping, so please stop, or we just have to just try and ignore them. Anyway, finally, Irish mothers have been strip searched for protesting Gaza deaths. I think we have a clip there. Would you be able to play the clip? I think it's the, yeah, that'll be great. We'll have a let's have a look at this.
Shame! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame! Shame on you! Innocent mothers against the genocide of 18,000 children on Mother's Day! Who are you supporting? Hands off her! Hands off her! Hands off! Hands off! Shame! Step aside! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame! Shame on you! Shame on you! Public mother! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Zionists! Westmeath! Traitors! Every single one of you! Fucking traitors! Shame! Westmeath! Zionists! The whole lot of you! Shame! You're not allowed to block my view. Shame! That's great. Get up here. Use your view to get up. We pay you for that.
So yeah, last weekend a group of Irish mothers held an overnight vigil outside the Dáil. It was peaceful. It was to mark Mother's Day and to remember more than 15,000 children killed in Gaza since the start of Israel's assault. Most recent assault, I should add. They had photos. They had a symbolic washing line of blood-stained baby clothes. They were planning to deliver a letter to the government the next morning. Instead, Gardaí broke up the vigil, arrested some women, trampled on the photos of the dead children, tore down the display. Some of the women were strip searched. Yeah, some of the women were strip searched. Others were allegedly cavity searched. I've been told they were cavity searched. I say allegedly, but I've been told from the women, some of the women themselves, this is what happened. So, I mean, let's just stop right now and just have a think. Like, forget Palestine, forget Hamas, forget taking sides, forget Israel. These were Irish mothers, Irish women, young and old, peacefully protesting the killing of children. Doesn't matter where those children were, what nationality they were. No, I don't think so. We don't take sides here on MOTH News. We're not pro this or anti that. We are. We're anti the killing of people and genocide. So, we're anti anybody who's doing that at the moment. So this mother decided to peacefully protest about the killings. It was a vigil. They wanted to do something as mothers to show their solidarity with other mothers around the world. Okay, you could argue, and people are arguing, maybe they shouldn't have blocked the Dáil gates. Okay, sure, I'll accept that. Maybe they should have moved when they were asked. But does that justify physically manhandling them into vans? And certainly, I don't even have to ask the question, it certainly doesn't justify them being strip searched. I've heard stories of women just being told to take off their clothes, trousers, knickers, everything, cavity searched. Irish mothers, these aren't like, they are activists. They're just mothers who are concerned, and they've ended up being arrested and strip searched. They didn't know this was going to happen. And it's an absolute disgrace. It wasn't about procedure. Like, this felt like punishment. This felt like a way of saying we need to shut this down. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again. And I'm asking, were these women treated this way to send a message, a warning to anybody else who wants to speak out? Because apparently we're allowed to protest peacefully in this country. Meanwhile, we're allowing military planes to land in Shannon Airport almost daily, carrying weapons headed for Israel. Over the past week, Lufthansa allegedly flew over a ton of munitions through Irish airspace, weapons that could end up killing more children in Gaza. Where were the Gardaí on that? Where is the urgency with that? Why are we heavy-handed with mothers holding baby clothes, but silent when actual weapons of war pass through our land? Ireland claims to be neutral, but this does not look neutral. Anyway, that's the news in brief. A global war, trade on war could hit your wallet, a homegrown crisis of abuse. We keep trying to ignore all those things, but let's move over to Philip. Our chief reporter, Philip O'Connor, should be there waiting in the wings. He's going to tell me about the guest he is on. How are you, Phil?
Good afternoon, Mr. Walsh. And I would have to say that we'll probably bring in our guest straight away, shall we? Because he's a man much missed on Irish media, and that will tell you exactly how good he is at his job. It's Constantin Gurdgiev, former adjunct professor in Trinity College Dublin in UCD, now in Northern Colorado. We've lost him to the great United States, but he's now back with us to talk about the tariffs. Constantin, you're very welcome. I'm delighted to talk to you again for the first time in a long time. Could we just get straight into it? And I'll ask you your opinion. The tariffs, have they shocked you? Has any of this surprised you at all?
Well, Philip, first of all, delighted to see you as well. Congratulations on starting a new media venture. That is awesome to hear. Tariffs, yes. So there's a kind of component of both, a shock and kind of anticipation and lifting of the uncertainty as well. We knew they are coming. Trump administration has pre-announced them before. We did not know the extent to which they're going to impact the countries. We did not know the list of the countries they're going to impact. We now have Falkland Islands as an independent nation declared to be a subject to tariffs of the United States. There is absurdity in the list itself, but the scale, the magnitude of it is impressively horrific. So if you think about the administration that is claiming to be doing things in favor of the US economy, trying to invest in the future of economic development and growth in the United States, it's going about it by doing the exact opposite of what should happen. Tariffs is not really and should not be the calling point if you are considering investing in the future of the country. Tariffs are really inflationary. That's the main point really behind it. But in addition to it, there are other reasons against tariffs. Point two would be that tariffs tend to reward larger market dominant players, monopolistic type of competitors at the expense of smaller, more innovation-driven economies and companies. Point three is that the tariffs are a tax on consumption, more egregious than sales tax and less efficient than sales tax itself. And point four is tariffs harm more middle to lower income households who face higher share of their income going to consumption in the first place. So in a way, they're regressive in terms of the redistribution of income. They're going to hit those who are hit hardest anyways by the years of inflation that we have experienced before.
Yeah, we'll talk we'll talk in a moment about the sort of working class people of America who voted for Donald Trump, and will probably end up being pretty hard hit by this. But I wanted to ask you, as a former editor of Business and Finance as well, you're something of an expert in how financial markets work. Usually, financial markets price these things in well in advance. And Donald Trump told us for 4 years maybe that he was going to introduce tariffs, and yet in the last few days we've seen bloodbaths in Japan and in Germany and on the Nasdaq and the S&P and that kind of. Why did the financial markets get it so wrong? Why were they not prepared for this, Constantin?
Because nobody could anticipate the scale and the breadth of those measures. We expected some sort of rationality from the administration, which shows very little signage of such rational decision making. So as you mentioned, yes, Dow fell yesterday alone 3.98%. That's 4% loss, 4.84% loss for S&P 500. That's okay. We kind of, we can be shocked by that. But then the markets also discovered that Italy has financial market, and that has slumped by about 3.6%. You have Hang Seng in Hong Kong falling 1.52% as well. The reason why it is so dramatic is because of the scale of those tariffs. President Trump's new policies put the effective tariff rate for the United States above the level of around 20% that was last set by in the 1930s by the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which is widely credited for triggering the Great Recession. The Great Depression, actually, not the Great Recession. We're talking about the current tariff rate in the United States standing at 24% post this week's announcements. This is the highest in over 100 years. You have to go back to 1909 to see the tariff rates of that magnitude. But this is not the end of it. And this is also what the markets are trying to price in. There is income an additional set of measures, which we call 232S measures, and they refer to some sector-specific tariffs, not country-specific tariffs, that are going to apply starting with April 10th, but yet to be announced in full. And they are expected to lift the overall average tariff rate, weighted average tariff rate, to 27% for the United States. Go back to the time when we caused the Great Depression, 20% roughly, the Smoot-Hawley type of tariffs. We're talking about 27% now. So we're looking at the administration which is literally recklessly damaging the economy and damaging the future of the US economy, competitiveness of the US economy, innovation in the US economy, and also, of course, damaging households and consumers as well.
As an academic, as an economist, when you look at the way this has been done and the extent to which it's been done, there's rumors that, ChatGPT is giving some very similar answers when you put in certain prompts that this is how they would do it. Do you think that the administration understood what it was doing and the extent of the damage that it could do when it introduced these tariffs?
A paradox. My colleague in Trinity College Dublin, for example, this morning asked the simple question: how can you be an economist or a person with economic education and back up this type of policies? Who are advising the government in the United States? And it's a very good question, because the answer is either the administration not listening to its own advisors, or the advisors it has are illiterate in terms of economics. I tend to think that that's the second really option here. because the first option would be simply they're causing damage without actually relating it to their own analysis and their own advice. When you look at the actual numbers of the tariffs themselves are supposedly based on a reciprocal principle. In other words, there is first a tariff of similar magnitude imposed onto the United States, and then the United States retaliate with a similar tariff. But when you actually look at a list of tariffs that countries on Trump list impose against the United States, their magnitudes lower than what is claimed. So some people did some analysis. We don't know exactly how the tariffs are calculated because they supposedly take non-tariff measures as well in the account and things like that. And the devil, of course, is in the detail. But in basic terms, some economists are starting to discover that when we say that, say, for example, China has a 30% tariff against the United States, roughly speaking, that actually is not a tariff rate. It is the tariff rate multiplied multiple times over by the additional factors which make absolutely zero sense, like ratios of trade balances. It's almost like a ratio of a ratio. So in a way, you have effectively somebody in the administration who is fitting or pigeonholing the actual data, the empirical, source of information into what is the desired objective. And the desired objective is to cause mayhem. We know that that is the objective because the first Trump administration in 2018 imposed tariffs on roughly $380 billion worth of goods crossing the US border. And of course, we know the outcome of that was really painful. The Trump administration, number one, ended up subsidizing to the tune of tens of billions of dollars US farmers who actually voted largely for the Trump administration in the first case and in the second election as well. And they end up being not, kind of the growth center for the economy, just like manufacturing, but rather the subsidies pool for the economy.
It is incredible to think that I think I read a statistic where there's over 2 trillion has been wiped out in value from US stock exchanges. And then I saw another statistic, it was around $731 billion is what everything is going to cost more now. So everything that the US imports at the moment, and I know you're a cultured man who likes a nice bottle of French wine on a Friday evening, how is this going to affect consumers, people like yourself, your family, your neighbors, the people who work in Northern Colorado University?
Well, there's two things here. There's a direct impact, and as you said, the cost is going up. Literally yesterday, I got a call from a friend who is in panic. His car is coming off a lease, and he needs to buy a new car. He went to the dealership, American car maker, and the dealers cannot actually quote the cars at this stage because they don't know what the prices will be. They have no idea what the lease rates are going to be, what the finance rates will be. All of the companies, and this is American companies themselves, are reacting to those tariffs as if they are throwing in huge uncertainty into the market. In addition to it, of course, there's an inflationary dimension of the tariffs. Yes, these prices on these goods and services that are being tariffed are going to be passed on to the US consumer, primarily because we no longer live in a world where the producers are generating or shipping very much generic type of output. All of our output we are buying is what we call differentiated in economics. In other words, there is different brands, there are different levels of quality, there are different attributes that we are buying, whether it is clothing or cars, or it is the electronics and things like that. So as a result of that, in that kind of environment, the producer can pass at least the part of the additional cost that the tariffs are imposing at the border onto the end user and consumer, and that will be the American consumers. So that's kind of the first order effects. But there are second order effects. Over a long run, these price increases are going to start trickling down into the likes of the price increases by the US producers themselves. So if you are a US producer and you are supplying to the markets a differentiated good or a differentiated service, something that is attached with the brand and attached with the differences in terms of the quality, you will start passing on those costs also to the consumer. So you have reduction in competition as a result of that, reduction in innovation, reduction in entrepreneurialism in the economy as well. It's a loss-loss type of scenario. Furthermore, this is a very interesting thing. We don't appreciate sufficiently enough how complex supply chains in this economy are, in modern economy, whether you're based in Ireland or you're based in elsewhere in Europe or in Asia Pacific or in the United States. Tariffs disrupt that as well. And for example, take producers of wine. You mentioned wine. They're supposed to benefit, the American producers of wine, supposed to be benefiting from the tariffs imposed onto the, say, for example, French and Italian wines. But in reality, they are not. They are threatened by those tariffs as much as if the tax was imposed on their own output. The reason for it is because they use supply chains to sell in the US market their own wine. Those supply chains need importers, they need imports coming into the market in order to generate significant enough activity so that the companies, important companies, can also represent American producers. If the importers collapse financially, then the smaller American producers, the more innovative winemakers, the more creative brewers, the more creative distillers will go out of business as well because they cannot sell directly in the US market, in their own domestic market, because they're simply not up to scale. So that complexity is being literally mauled by a mad bear running through the economic policy of the United States today.
Yeah, so it's interesting how it dovetails between the imports and the domestically produced wines. They use the same method to get onto the shop shelves and into the restaurants and the bars and that. This is one big shock for the American economy, Constantin. But there's also the thing of, I mean, I know you've been a proponent of smaller government for a long time, but the extent to which cuts are being made in the American government, it's rendering people unemployed. And of course, those people are people who spend money in their local communities as well. What are
100%.
we gearing up towards? Yeah, what are we gearing up towards here?
We are gearing towards the total mayhem. And I think that one of the theories about why the government of the United States would do, the federal government in the United States would engage in such a reckless behavior in terms of its economic policies, whether they are trade policies, investment policies, or fiscal policies that you mentioned last, the question can be only answered by the idea that you create mayhem, you create a problem that is so big that you have the crisis environment. You, on one hand, force the Federal Reserve to retaliate to that by lowering interest rates and hopefully start somewhat absorbing some of those, shocks through the monetary policy. And on the other hand, that allows you to start introducing drastic changes that you want to introduce. So when you talk about Dodge, for example, and the measures in terms of the cuts, first of all, if you wanted to reduce the deficit, and I would love to see a reduction in the US deficit beyond any doubts, and I would love to see long-term measures to address the issues of the US fiscal debt. Absolutely. You wouldn't be going about it by cutting the headcounts in the US government, because the headcounts in the US government amount to about 8% of the total expenditure of the federal government. 92% have nothing to do with the personnel. So even if you eliminate all of the employees of the US government, you have barely doing a dent in terms of the debt of the United States. So the other problem is, of course, you can't just go and start kind of slash and burn type of an approach to cuts in the public services as well. They're cutting the core services to the veterans. They're cutting the core services, not so much services themselves, but people who are administering those services. Yes, so access is declining. Yeah, in likes of say Social Security, there have been very well-known cuts, for example, in the National Forest Service and in the National Park Service, where the reductions are actually at the core face, at the coal face of people who fight forest fires, who reducing the risk of forest fires. These are the people who carry chainsaws in the mountains in order to try to reduce the danger to the general community, to actual people living around those places. And yet, we don't care. We just cut. So yeah, you're right insofar as that I would be more erring, not necessarily fully 100% erring, but more erring on the side of being hawkish in terms of fiscal policy. You would not go about adjusting the fiscal policy of the United States by the way the Dodge is going about it.
Politically, how is this going to play out? Because again, many people voted for Donald Trump not thinking that it was going to affect them. Among them, there are the farmers you mentioned, the forestry workers you mentioned, who did want a certain amount of this, but didn't think that it was going to come to their backyard. We have midterm elections, which are a little over a year and a half away. We've heard commentators asking for people to tolerate short-term pain for long-term gain, I think is the expression. Do you think that the Republican administration is capable of surviving that short-term pain in order to achieve those long-term gains that they believe can accrue?
Well, remember, the Republican majority in the House and in the Senate is not exactly 100% stable. It is a subject to risks, as you mentioned, the midterm elections. There are also by-elections happening. If you go back to the 1930, for example, I think something like about a third of the Congress was under the risk of, or actually in the case of the, extraordinary elections because of the deaths amongst the Congress members. So we are having this kind of issue there as a threat to the Republican Party. But by and large, I think the hope is that by the time the midterms roll in, the kind of sharp pain is going to wear out, and there will be some sort of the recovery triggered again by the monetary policy, accommodative monetary policy coming from the Federal Reserve. To what extent that's going to materialize, we do not know. What we do know is that so far, the indication is traditional, like with the Trump administration in its first iteration. The kind of by-elections and, say, local elections, like Wisconsin Supreme Court election would be a good example, are not going Trump's way. They're not going the Republican way. It's not enough yet to start worrying the majority of the Republicans in Congress, but there is some already movement and there is some already discontent within the Republican Party members in Congress itself. I mean, personally, my view is let whatever train hit them hard, because they deserve it. And I say that, and I used to be more kind of, say, the Reaganite type of the Republican back in the many years ago. I'm apolitical these days completely and have been so for many decades. But before that, I would be sympathizing with a kind of Reaganite, republicanism. That party is no longer recognizable. That party no longer has a standing in the United States other than that extreme voting power that they can generate by effectively pursuing, reckless populism.
I keep coming back to that Chinese phrase, may you live in interesting times, is what they want to say to people, and I do think that we're living in times now that you're going to be referring to in 10 years' time, if you continue your career in academia there. The students that you have at the moment and the students you will have in 10 years' time, what do you think your reflections that you will be teaching them will be about this period in American economic history and indeed global financial history?
Oh, look, I mean, the whole century so far, the 25 years of it that we have lived through, is upending completely our understanding of the previous world order, previous financial and economic world order as well. So as a result of that, there's so much to learn from it. What is really frustrating is that the students I see, and our students are generally kind of more conservative. They come from, a lot of them come from being the first generation students in their families. They're hardworking. They carry the full load of full-time work and also studies. These type of students are now looking at it from the point of view of what is wrong with the society around us, that we cannot solve the problems, that we know solutions exist too. There are solutions to, say, for example, imbalances in trade. There are solutions to the imbalances in financial accounts, in fiscal policies and so forth. We discuss those in the classroom. We can agree to them, even though we might be coming from ideologically very different angles or points of view. But every time we agree on them, we look back and look at the Washington, D.C., and we see completely different things being done. And the puzzlement that I have, that I see amongst the younger people, the younger generations in the United States today, is why is that happening? Why it keeps happening? Why can we not actually arrive at the coherent, cohesive policy that we can implement and we can benefit from, when we know those policies can exist, when we know that those solutions can exist?
When you look at the lay of the land now, and this is my last question to you because I'm sure you have things to be doing before you have that lovely bottle of wine this evening. When you look at the lay of the land now, Constantin, what do you expect will happen next? Because it would seem that on one side you have a Donald Trump who's not going to back down, and you have an EU and a China and a Japan and a South Korea who can't back down, because if they let him win this, it's kind of over. What do you expect them to do? What will their reaction be? Like China, like for like, or will they go in even harder?
Oh, China cannot go like for like at this stage, because the US tariffs against China, when you count from 2018 measures that are still on the books, amount to more than 60% of the tariff. I think we're looking at the reorganization of the global economic order. That reorganization is going to accelerate in the direction towards the Asia Pacific that it was drifting towards before. And as a result of that, we're going to kind of, sorry, I mean, I think there was an interruption there. So as a result of that reorientation, the United States is losing power, losing economic power, but also losing the soft diplomatic power. This is the end of the empire in a way. Can it be reversed? That's a very big question that we're trying to entertain today, but that's a new completely question. So we have no really answers to it yet, because it really arose in the last probably 5-6 years, when the US kind of intellectual elites started addressing that and started asking that question. But it's very simple that whatever retaliation is going to happen, the short-term retaliation can be sharp, and it will exacerbate the costs on the ground in the United States of these measures. It will potentially trigger a worldwide recession. How sharp and how long remains to be answered. But on the other hand, the most really damaging effect will be in the long run. One of the very fundamental things that I didn't mention before here, today, that is really impactful in terms of the tariffs that were announced this week, is that these tariffs apply to both the United States adversaries. You can think of China being United States adversary. You can think of other countries being United States adversaries, but also to the United States allies. We are now tearing apart long-term agreements that even the Trump administration in its first iteration has signed, like the trade agreements with Canada, trade agreement with Mexico, and so forth. That is the first time that a major superpower, hegemonic superpower, the dominant economic and military power in the world, has gone voluntarily off the rails in terms of destroying its own alliances, destroying its own long-term, if you want, agreements and treaties.
As you say, there are an awful lot of questions still to be answered, and I hope that you'll join us again on MOTH News Live some Friday when those answers become apparent. But for now, Constantin Gurdgiev, thanks so much for joining us here this Friday afternoon, and have a great day. And make sure to stock up on that wine before the prices go up as well.
Thanks, Philip.
Thank you.
Excellent.
There's Keith coming back in now.
Thanks very much, Constantine. We better let that man go. He's got things. He's a busy man. Let that man go now.
That man has wine to buy.
That man has work to do. That was very interesting, wasn't it? It made me think of Brexit, and I don't know. I'm sure you remember. You'll know Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you'll remember the book that his father wrote about. I think it was called The Sovereign Individual. How to the coming economic resolution and how to survive and prosper in it. And basically, it was like, chaos is coming, and this is how you survive it. And this book was kind of like, poo-pooed a little bit in England and UK, but it did very well in America, and especially it started like being passed around and bought around Silicon Valley, tech bros, that kind of people, like, the types of people that might run like companies like Tesla, stuff like that. Like, and the Americans really loved it, and the guy was booked for a lot of talks around America. And I wonder, just like with Rees-Mogg when he was involved in the Tory government with Boris and the chaos that Brexit was going to create, and the thing about that economic chaos is that certain individuals, if they're set up properly, are going to prosper massively from this chaos. Is that what's happening in America? Because
I think the window.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not presuming that Donald Trump actually read a book, but I'm presuming somebody behind him did and is telling him what to do.
Somebody may have summarized it from it. May even have been ChatGPT at some point, But I do think you make a very interesting point there, Keith, because there's never a disaster that occurs without somebody making some money off it. And I'll tell you that, like, there's a very sort of small scale private investor, a fellow I know. I was training martial arts from maybe 6-7 years ago. And, you follow people on Instagram, you see their stories and that kind of thing. And he lives in the Midwest in America. And even he's saying, I'm waiting around now for a signal to buy, because share prices have come down so much over the last few days that he's trying to pick, the sort of, the odd diamond in the rough that might sort of appear from all this kind of thing. So I think investors are definitely thinking that way. And then the whole market is built up.
I'm going to bring Al in. You just keep talking. We'll bring Al in.
Yeah.
I know he's interested.
If you remember the housing crisis there, or sorry, the crisis back in 2008, 2009, there was actually things packaged so that things would go wrong, and distressed assets are what they're called. I'm sure Al has both bought and sold a few distressed assets in their time, me and you among them, Keith. And, so there's always an opportunity there for somebody to pick up something on the cheap,
I wouldn't sell you, Philip.
I wouldn't tell me I'm priceless, am I? Or worthless, one or the other.
Well, definitely distressed.
But that's
invaluable.
So, thank you, sir. Thank you,
Al. I think because you mentioned martial arts there, Phil. I thought you were talking about Al. Thoughts, Al. We need your thoughts. Somebody who actually, like, Phil's a journalist. I'm literally a mouthpiece, but you're out there. You're doing business. You're in America. You have an awareness. You're dealing with technology. What are your thoughts on all of this, and what what Constantine had to say and what I was talking about, this economic chaos and how people prosper.
Yeah, it's like the 48 Laws of Power. Have you read that, Robert Greene? So it's kind of every world leader at the moment is manifesting the Wild West land grab, the gold rush, right? So it's kind of it's an economic takeover and battle, right? In terms of who can impose tariffs on the competition, essentially, right? So there's nothing benign about tariffs, the economic warfare in terms of who's moving where, who's moving money, and as you said, the technology conversations cannot be ignored because everybody's kind of underneath they're kind of saying, if you look at the commentary from Trump, Elon Musk, of the latter months, it's very much we're in the equivalent of the Cold War. AI is the weapon this time, right? So who's going to beat the race for AI? Who's going to get the land grab on the infrastructure that's needed to support AI? And look, you have to look at the resources. So look at Greenland, heavy resource in uranium. That's obviously going to be a specific resource for scaling data centers, running AI, GPUs, production. So it's very much on that production side. So that's something that we could probably look at as from an investigative journalist perspective, looking at that movement. So, is it a resource conversation, right? I think the fluctuation on the markets this week, if you look at trillions of dollars being wiped out, billions the week before, based on kind of commentary in relation to specific countries, how they're going to be treated. Everybody expected or had an anticipation or even an expectation that Ireland would be somehow excluded from the European tariff. That hasn't happened. Seems that we're going to be treated on the same level. Interesting to see the UK speaking out in relation to they now feel that they're being rewarded for Brexit in somehow. So they're 10%, Europe is 20%. I found that narrative very interesting, right? And that's not benign either, right? Kind of somewhat opportune.
Can I ask you there, when you say it's not benign, what's behind that then? What, like?
I guess.
Yeah, why are they trying? Are they also trying to throw a spanner in the works as well?
Yeah, my opinion.
Yeah.
Is there a little bit of sort of divide and conquer going on there? Because obviously, Ireland is very dependent on UK. We trade a lot with them, and that UK is now, the biggest country outside of the EU in Europe, and it would sort of strike you that, maybe there's this sort of, little bit of maneuvering. I was making the point last night, Al, that with Ireland, for instance, now Ireland wants to protect the pharmaceuticals thing. Pharmaceuticals are actually exempt from the 20% tariff at the moment, right? At the moment being the operative word. And that means then that when Micheál Martin and Pascal Donoghue and the lads go to the table in the EU, that's their card in their back pocket. They don't want that to change. So obviously they're going to be a little bit on the American side maybe and carry the can for the Americans at that negotiation table in the EU. And of course then you'll have the Great Britain on the outside of it putting that pressure on. Is it a kind of a clever move on behalf of the Americans to sort of sow this little bit of division so that, whatever discussions do have to happen around tariffs now, there's already a little bit of divergence in how maybe different countries want this to go?
I think we have to be concerned about the future of Europe for sure. I mean, I don't think that's a ridiculous conversation at this point for us to start looking into in terms of just the general disconnect between the European countries. You essentially have a threat of actual war on each corner, right? So if there is a move against Iran, if Russia and Ukraine does escalate, Israel and Palestine issue is far from bottomed out. That's disappointing for everybody. And then you got to look at the other countries that are in there. China are kind of sitting there. How are they going to react to an aggressive move from that perspective, right? So, and then in the middle, there just seems to be a muted response, which is a paradox from Europe, right? It's kind of like it's nowhere. It's neither collectively making decisions or it's collectively decided on what's good or bad. you've got, evident, as we spoke the last few weeks, Keith, we can't measure the performance of a country based on social media, but all we can look at is the feedback seems to be consistent, albeit being powered by an agenda or not. There seems to be general unrest, and back to your point, Philip. I have travelled into a lot of these locations over the last number of weeks, and I have been in Lisbon, I have been in London, I have been in Berlin, I have been in London quite a bit. I have been back to Ireland. I have been in the north. I've been in the US, and I can tell you from my perspective, there is a lot of unrest, for sure, and it's very evident on some parts, not all, right, but in some parts of the cities, it is evident that there's a lot of unrest, and there does seem to be a imbalance. There seems to be a bit of contempt building, which I think has been created towards people in general. Goodwill is being impacted by, there's a divide, there's a class divide, and it's evident. So that mainstream media propaganda engine is working to some degree. There seems to be a lot of kind of people bubbling a bit. Even if you look at our own show last week or the week before, when we just did a very short snippet of a topic in relation to one of our countrymen, right, Garen, right, and then blew up around negativity. Why are you attacking this guy? I was like, we're not attacking the guy at all. We're just discussing it. It was like, wow, chill out, fuck out, guys. I was like, I was getting messages and hit, man. It was like, geez, okay, we I don't think we've said anything ridiculously ill or when did we stop giving our opinions? And then obviously on a more serious level, the topic in relation to peaceful protest, an invasion, an intrusion, and an assault on somebody, we're on the cusp of police state. If somebody in an authority role feels that they can just literally treat somebody like that, a human being that has done nothing wrong, has just voiced their opinion peacefully, and obviously, look, I know you guys have drilled into it because we wouldn't be speaking about it, but if that is down to the point of there's a fact where somebody's been violated, we've passed the realms of logic now. We've gone into nonsensical, ridiculous conduct. And, I'll fast forward, the guy that performed that or the group that did that, definitely get my dick of the week times 100, right, to do that to any human being. So we have now got to the point where it's embarrassing as an Irish citizen to be actually speaking about that somebody was treated like that.
Do you know what, Al? It's actually not unique either, because I kind of noticed this. We had another case earlier on the week that Keith and I were speaking about privately, and it's something that we'll definitely return to probably in next week's show, right? Where you have a situation where you have Irish protesters in Berlin and Germany, where you were recently, who've been told to leave the country. They haven't committed any crimes, right? But they turned up at pro-Palestinian protests, have been told to leave the country, right? Now, so add that to what happened to the women in Dublin outside the Dáil there. So those two things. Here in Sweden, the big discussion all week has been immigrants like myself, and we have been told, and this is a quote, watch your tongue, right? Because if I say or do things here, maybe they don't want me here anymore, right? So there's a very, with all that's happening in the world, right? And there is this attack. We've heard an awful lot from, the Trump government and from Elon Musk and from other people, and indeed from ourselves, about freedom of speech. But it seems to be that certain people are trying to place conditions on that freedom of speech, which we've tried never to do here. We've had people on that at times none of us have agreed with, and yet we'll talk to them about these things to see if we can reach some sort of a consensus. But it's starting to get very worrying in terms of that. The idea of somebody telling me to watch my tongue is kind of, and they're actually trying to introduce a law here where you can't hurt a policeman's feelings. And you're going to laugh at that, Keith Walsh, right? And he laughed on cue there, which is perfect. And literally the law says that if you hurt the policeman's feelings, you can be done for that as a crime. And it's just getting ridiculous because literally everything I say to any policeman has hurt his feelings in some way. And in fact, covering the recent school shooting back in February, a policeman, if that law had existed then, I was in the back of the van yet again, kind of thing. So we are headed towards a very, very dangerous place in terms of freedom of speech and the right to protest and the right to make our voices heard.
I do have a statement here as well from the Mothers Against Genocide, who wouldn't come on. They were going to come on, but there is a kind of an ongoing issue case, and then they decided not to. So they did send me a statement. We stand over the experiences of the people who were arrested. Among these people experienced strip searches, degrading treatment, and cavity search. We note the various Gardaí accounts appear in the media. We are in the process of receiving legal advice in relations to complaints. So the advice was from the legal people that they just don't talk publicly until, a certain point. And it just, I mean, look, there's, I suppose, off the record, they're speaking, and I know, like, from talking to them, they're traumatized, like, I'll talk about one particular woman, and it's probably like a few of their experience, who just went out to be involved in a peaceful protest and ended up being like arrested and strip searched. And like, this is an Irish mother. Like, when do you? I've gone on protests. I'm sure you guys have been out and gone out and got involved in something that you thought, oh, this would be nice. This is like a bunch of people kind of going, like, we don't want whatever it is, water charges, or like, we need a new, we don't want the factory being built on our football pitches, whatever it is. We've all been involved in something. The last thing you expect is to be arrested and strip searched and cavity searched, if that part is true, which they are saying it's true. And I think you're right, Alec.
And back to Philip's point. So Philip, you what is it? Hold your tongue. Sorry, I'm paraphrasing, but so if you go back to, like, let's step back in time. Do you remember Prima Nocta, right? I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Which is that tipped the balance to rebellion, right? Where a lord could essentially take a bride on the first night. And that led to, like, implementation.
I think it featured in Braveheart. That's where most people know.
Yes, did. And but that was enough to tip the balance, where the common person or man at the time obviously that was enough to tip them over the edge, right? And if you look at these little aggravators, or what kind of chipping into, aggravating different groups for different reasons, so it's kind of like peaceful protest, let's do something, boom. And I'm kind of saying this all feels very orchestrated, and it's like channeling anger into a group, which would, like, there is no other result that's going to occur than there's going to be some blowback or aggravation, and everybody's got a point to resolve. And back to your point, Keith, it's like, the point where people came out against the water raids, that was enough to tip the balance. Like, we're sick of this, right? And I think there isn't a person, in my humble opinion, would sit back and, unless they're not of sound mind or corpus mentis, right, would look at that situation and say that's acceptable. It's unacceptable from any situation where somebody would feel disempowered, right, to the point that their liberty is impacted by a police force, or by somebody that's put in to protect and serve their citizens, right? Like, that's the essence of An Garda Síochána, right? Community officer. That's an essence. And for them to stand over that, Keith, and say, oh, we're investigating it, what a lot of BS, right? It's like, if this was a process and a fair due process, they would be suspended pending review immediately, and the communication would be, we do not condone or stand over this behaviour, because we're an integral organisation that investigates the abuse of power. And that's the word, right? It's abuse of power. And if you look at it on a global scale, a macro level, that's what's happening. It's abuse of power. Imposing tariffs, who's going to be impacted? The working people. Imposing taxes, who's going to be affected? The working people. Property is too expensive. So if you bring it all down into the reality, it's the people on the ground who are going to be hit from every angle, right?
But there's something here with the Mothers Against Genocide and what's happened, because Mothers Against Genocide, they have what's called soft power. And the rising wasn't the problem for the Brits, right? It was when they
When
executed
they treated
those men, right?
Yeah.
And if you think of who those men were, you know, they were writers, they were poets, they were, you know, they were visionaries, they were lecturers, they were, you know,
they were labor representatives.
yeah, they were sort of like, you know, they were
Good
sort of,
point.
you might call them hippies these days, you know, hippies with a dream and a gun, you know. But and there was something in that where I'm not saying innocence, but like a soft power. And then it was actually when those men were killed that the country got behind.
I love that comparison, Keith. And look, I've studied it extensively in terms of, you know, we don't like to admit this as a nation, but the reality is 1916 was a very clumsy rebellion. It didn't really get too much support. You know, had it been, as you correctly said, it had the martyrs or the patriots being dealt with in a different manner, we probably would be having a different conversation today, even from the perspective of what if anything really happened or changed. And as you correctly said, it wasn't until the brutal atrocities that ensued afterwards that ignited support to say, hey, this is out of order, right? But this is not uncommon. This also happened in the French Rebellion, right? Okay. It wasn't until they started executing the royal families that's when the other countries got involved. They said, hey, this is out of order. Up to that, they kind of left them at it, right? They kind of said, look, they brought it on themselves. We can see why there's distress and unrest. And it was until they started, you know, the guillotine, which is a very infamous punishment that ensued from that. That's when people started getting involved, and that's when the trouble started, right? So I think you're right. I think we're on the cusp of something kind of really morbid and concerning. And look, I think we've lost the battle of humanity when a mother to a mother cannot come out and say, stop killing kids. Regardless of political landscape, who's doing what, who's right, who's not right. I think, you know, at any time when, you know, we you know, unfortunately or fortunately, we lack the ability to be able to give life or produce life, so we can never really fully understand that feeling. We can empathize and speak to, but a mother to a mother must be looking at this saying, if somebody took my child's life in the morning, I'm empathizing and sympathizing with this mother, and I want to come out and speak out of it. I mean, why would anybody stop that?
But the treatment of these mothers, I think, will get people who haven't gotten involved in even thinking about this or looking at going, what? It's a kind of a, you know, it's a low common denominator event in that it will bring more people in Ireland into and will make them interested and get them involved. There is a big rally planned for Wednesday. It'll be interesting to see what happens there, but this could be a moment. We could talk about this for hours, and we will, because we'll be on every Wednesday or every Friday at 3:00, and we will be eventually at some stage. We'll be live every day here on MOTH News. Before we go, a dick of the week, Phil. Do you have anybody in mind?
I think I'm going to row in behind what Al said, and we'll just put it down to whoever decided that those mothers against genocide were to be strip searched. Whoever that man or woman is, they're getting dick of the week. And I don't even know, is that unanimous? I'd say it's probably pretty close to unanimous. It's not since the time of Jeffrey Leo have we had anything so unanimous, I'd say, this week.
They're up there in the trophy with Leo, and that's some. I thought that
Jason Michal Martin will be disgusted. He's losing out again this week.
Well, he wants dialogue. Have you seen this latest post? It's time to get into dialogue with Trump.
Exactly.
You sat next to him, dude.
You were literally sitting. Before you had the chance to talk to the man.
If only I was at the White House. If only I could get to the White House.
Literally 2 weeks ago.
McGregor, I could speak to him.
Would you like another drop of whiskey, Donald? Work away there. Work away. There you go.
Would you like some Kerrygold butter, Donald? Would you like some butter on your potatoes?
I'll tell you might be needing that butter for completely different reasons in the future, but I'll say nothing.
Actually, I was watching the footage, and do you remember Darby O'Gillen and the Little People? That it reminded me of a scene from that. Go on, I shall go on. Sure, make a wish there, Donald. What would you like to happen?
I can't say. Only a fellow Cork man could say that about Michal Martin, so I have nothing to add there. But perfectly.
You'll only get 3 wishes now, Donald. But if you make the 4th, I'll take them all back.
Except he probably swapped out wishes for tariffs, and that's how he got away with the Viagra.
I'll leave the pharmaceuticals alone, Donald. Come on, I'm only messing.
I think once Donald found out that we made Viagra here, he said we better leave those people alone.
He's keeping it up anyway. He's keeping it up.
We're literally keeping the current American government up. Right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining. We'll be back here around 3:00, 3:30 next week. Yeah. Thank you very much for watching as always. And if you have any stories that you'd like us to follow up on or look into, do let us know. And we want to hear your comments. Follow us. We're on all of the social medias. You literally can't miss us. We have some fantastic social media bits going out at the moment that are literally taking over the internet. So you can't miss us. We'll be back here next Friday at 3:00. Do stay in touch. And yeah, Moth News is here. It's here for you, for the stories that you want to hear about and that you want to tell others about. Have a great Friday. We'll see you next week.
Okay.